Hello, GenderqueerChat viewers. Welcome to Fridays with Christina. First of all, I want to apologize a little bit for not making a video yesterday, but I've got it now, so I was kind of busy yesterday, so. Okay, so the topic this week is what is gender, and what does gender mean to you? Wikipedia defines it as a set of masculine, feminine, and other characteristics described as a third gender. So that's pretty cool, actually, that they say that there's a third gender. I find that interesting, that and I had no clue about this, of course, when I was younger, but many cultures have sort of kind of third gender rules, or sometimes even more than that, so that's pretty cool. So what how do you define gender? As everyone else on the channel here has said, it's definitely a social construct, and I agree with that for the most part. But then I think, see, I'm personally more interested in a little bit more interested in the biological side of it, because I find it interesting that, for example, children who are transgender, they say, like, at age that even as young as 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever, they say, "I'm a boy," firmly, or "I'm a girl," or whatever. The opposite from what, the opposite from what, physical sex they're born into. So I find that interesting, that they're so adamant about that. So there has to be some sort of biological component to it, right? So I was doing a little bit of research on the internet to see if I could find articles about neuroscience or biology in general, and transgender people, or gender identity in general, and so on and so forth. So it seems that there is, well, certainly there's a brain component to it. Yeah, so I found out that in the brain there is evidence that there is some FTMs, certain parts of the brain can resemble more cisgendered males, and with the same token, MTFs, a certain part of the brain can resemble cis females. No, I mean, it depends what article you look at, right? But it seemed like, for the most part, MTFs, their brains resembled, their biological sex or whatever. But except for a couple little things. So, like, there's like this, I won't get too deep into it because you people probably aren't all that interested, but apparently there's this little thing called, was it BST, and then there's a small c, I don't know, it's a certain part of the brain, so, and it, like, anyway, resembled, the gender that they identify as. In terms of, I don't know, size or whatever. Of course, hormones change the brains, so that's like a whole other thing. So, but of course, they were trying to test, these articles that I read, they were trying to test people who actually haven't gone on transgender people who haven't gone on hormones as of yet, and trying to figure out, are there still certain parts of the brain. So I think that's I would think that that's a decent piece of evidence to show that that there's something biological to it. But the other thing is that in this specific part of the brain, doesn't it's the same in both sexes. until you're like an adult. So, and of course transgender people often, almost all the time, it seems, have gender dysphoria since they were a child, right? So, and then the other thing is that, as someone else mentioned, is that hormones in utero, is that the correct term? I think. When the kid hasn't been born yet, different hormones, testosterone, whatever, can masculinize or feminize the brain. I think it seems to be that it's more shaped on how much testosterone is in there. I don't know how much estrogen in utero you get. Like, I don't know. But, yeah, I would think that, I don't know. I think it's like a lack of testosterone versus too much testosterone or whatever. I think it's based on more on testosterone. It seems. I don't know. So, yeah. So, and then there's like the 2-digit, 4-digit ratio where you measure your index finger versus your ring finger, and apparently the lower the ratio is, the idea is, now, again, this is, everything that I'm saying is still kind of speculation. Everything that's not, 100%. But the theory is that if you have a lower 2-digit, 4-digit ratio, that you had more testosterone in the womb. So, mine is slightly more masculine, so it's possible. And maybe that changes your gender identity. I don't know. See, that's another question. Just because if someone gets more testosterone in the womb, does that necessarily change their gender identity? Because there are women, cis women in the world who have, let's say, more male-like typical behaviors, for lack of a word, or go into male-like typical jobs and whatever, and those women, they still identify totally as women. And to be clear, these cis women can have a more masculine 2-digit, 4-digit ratio. Of course, maybe they have maybe they do have gender dysphoria, and they're just in denial about it. I don't know. There's so many different variables here that it's ridiculous. So, okay, so there's a part of the brain that could determine this B. They put it in, I don't even know how to pronounce it, in capital letters: B, capital S, capital T, and a small c. And that's the, I can't think. That's the letters for, you know what I mean, acronym. Yeah, that's the acronym for whatever this part of the brain is. And so apparently that is part of it. 2, testosterone in the womb. And then, of course, there's environmental factors. So we can talk about nature versus nurture. Well, in reality, it's probably a bit of both for gender identity. Probably. Because I will be completely honest, I was raised entirely pretty much just by my dad. Long story there, but I won't get into it. Well, not really a long story. But anyway. So maybe that had an influence on my gender identity as feeling more androgynous. Who knows? I don't know. I can't prove it any which way, It could be a coincidence. Who knows? Maybe there was more testosterone when I was in the womb. Maybe, I don't know. Because the thing is that I don't identify completely as male, certainly. And I don't... I still prefer female pronouns and such, so... So, I don't think that I would have that part of the brain being similar to males, but I don't know. Cis males, who knows? I'd have to like get a CT scan or something to find out, and that's what doctor would do. Hey, let's look at your brain, Christina, and figure out if you resemble cisgendered male people. Yeah. That'd be cool, wouldn't it? That would be awesome. I would love to do that one day, but I know nobody's gonna, you know. The thing is about gender that I'm seeming to find more and more and more and more, and as other people have put it, it is most certainly not a binary, as I might have thought when I was little. Not anymore, because there are intersex people, there are a whole whack range of gender identities everywhere across the spectrum. Like mine, for instance. You can't, I cannot say that I identify 100% as female. But on the other hand, I can't say that I identify 100% as male. So, how the heck do you place that on the map? You know? Then that brings another question of, okay, well, first of all, am I a third gender? Not entirely, because I don't say that I'm exactly in the middle. I say that I'm more female in some ways and more masculine in other ways. So the question with gender, of course, brings up questions like, how do we organize our society if there is no real gender binary? And that brings up the other question, what about the majority of people who are cisgendered? However, maybe, just maybe, the majority of people are cisgendered, and those people, like, aren't necessarily as cisgendered as we think they are. Maybe they, you know, because there's certainly plenty of tomboys out there, and there's certainly plenty of, you know, guys out there who are a little bit more feminine, and maybe this gender binary just really doesn't exist in the slightest, and we just keep perpetuating it for sake of, what, comfort? Being regular, you know, like simplicity. Of course, then this gets into things like feminism, and that the gender binary is there to perpetuate the patriarchy and stuff like that.